Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. You're watching another edition of Break the Fake, where we debunk fake news and combat false narratives. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and let's get rolling. So, Russia just ran a so-called press tour of occupied Ukrainian territory. It's 9th if you're keeping count. But it's less of a press event and more of a traveling propaganda circus, complete with emotional performances, nostalgia for empires, and a guest list that reads like a who's who of political irrelevance. The mastermind behind the farce, Zahar Pilepin, Kremlin propagandist and part-time novelist, who seemed to think staging foreign visitors in a war zone counted as international credibility. Now this time, the tour made its usual stop in Mariupol. Yeah, that Mariupol, the same city Russia turned into rubble, now paraded as a model of liberation. The guests, a familiar roster of Kremlin-friendly voices, a former US Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney, an ex-prime minister from Slovakia, a Czech ex-senator, and some American broadcaster named Pearson Sharp, who teared up on RT after visiting a children's memorial, but had absolutely nothing to say about the Ukrainian kids buried in mass graves or deported to Russia.
The people who send the missiles over here don't have to look at the faces of the families who've lost their children. And I'm not going to talk about it because I'll lose it on camera. But we went to the Alley of Angels in Donetsk, which is a memorial for the children who died. And it's rough, Rick.
Now, let's not pretend now these people are neutral observers. They've been parroting Moscow's talking points for years. All the Kremlin needs is a few foreign accents on camera to pretend its war crimes come with subtitles and international approval. After the photo ops and heartstring tugging came the patriotic detour to Nizhny Novgorod, where the group joined a youth festival and toured a military training center. There, they chatted with a foreign fighter who joined the Russian side. Because when your war is not going great, why not show off the one American willing to die for your lie? Now, the whole thing is pretty much an insult layered on atrocity. While real journalists are blocked, jailed, or worse, Moscow parades around a handful of fringe figures to sell the fantasy that its invasion is noble, justified, and even admired. But no number of press tours can cover up what's actually happening in cities like Mariupol, and if you need a guided tour to understand that, you're not reporting the news, you're part of the performance. Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán wants you to believe that Ukraine is not a sovereign state. Why? Well, because in his words, it lives on Western money and lost sovereignty when Russia took 1/5 of its territory. In other words, Moscow script read with a Hungarian accent. Speaking to a Hungarian media outlet, Orbán dismissed reports that Ukrainian forces detected reconnaissance drones on a Hungarian border. He said he trusts his ministers, who claim nothing crossed over, but even if it had, Ukraine had no right to react as if it were sovereign. According to him, Ukraine is essentially a Western protectorate, not a country that decides its own fate.
Tehát Ukrajna nem Magyarországgal áll háborúban, Oroszországgal. Tehát neki a keleti irányú határán lévő drónokkal kéne foglalkozni. Itt NATO tagállamok vannak. Ukrajna hátországa biztonságban, hát innen nem támadja meg senki. Nem tudok, hogy a lengyelek, a románok, a magyarok vagy a szlovákok meg akarnák, vagy a bulgárok meg akarnák őket támadni. Tehát ez egész, ez egy kamu dolog, hát semmi jelentősége nincs. Én a minisztereimnek hiszek, de tegyük föl, hogy néhány méterre berepült volna, és akkor mi van? Ukrajna nem egy független ország, Ukrajna nem egy szuverén ország. Ukrajnát mi tartjuk el? A nyugat tartja el, mi adjuk a fegyvereit. Nem szabad úgy viselkedni a Ukrajnának, mintha egy szuverén állam lenne. Hát ő elvesztette a területének 1/5 az oroszokkal vívott háborúban, elvették tőlük az oroszok. Ott a szuverenitás véget ért. A maradék területet mi tartjuk el? Hát ha mi úgy döntünk, mármint a nyugat úgy dönt, hogy holnap reggel nem adunk egy forintot, csak Ukrajna bezárja, a kész, vége, megszűnt. Tehát kicsit komolyabban kellene ehhez viszonyulni. Most 2, 3, 4 magyar drón, ami vagy átment, vagy nem az ügy, amivel szerintem az ukránok fog. Itt nem az ellenségeik vannak.
Now this is just straight up Kremlin rhetoric. Sovereignty doesn't disappear because a state relies on allies for support. By that logic, half of NATO would lose sovereignty overnight since security cooperation, military aid, foreign investments, these are cornerstones of modern alliances. Poland receives EU funding. The Baltic states depends on NATO's forward presence. Even Hungary itself is heavily subsidized by Brussels. Does Orbán think Hungary is not independent either? Or is sovereignty only lost when it makes Moscow uncomfortable? Now, Orbán also claims Ukraine lost sovereignty because Russia occupies about 20% of its territory. That is not how sovereignty works. Occupation is not recognition. International law is clear. Ukraine's border remains Ukraine's border no matter how many Russian troops stand on them. This is absurd, and once again, it's a talking point imported directly from Moscow's propaganda mill. Orbán has spent years cultivating close ties with Russia, even as the rest of Europe distanced itself. He has slowed EU sanctions, watered down aid packages, and positioned Hungary as Russia's friend inside NATO. Repeating Kremlin-style narratives about Ukraine being a non-sovereign state is not a slip of the tongue, but rather part of a deliberate pattern. Moscow's Russia One pundits get paid for this kind of performance, while Orbán does it for free and calls it realism. Russia once bragged about having the second most powerful army in the world. 3 years into the war, that army has gone from rolling out modern tanks to dusting off World War II era relics. And now, according to RT, mounting horses. But if this so-called historic return of the cavalry is upon us, is it a sign of innovation or desperation? Now, according to RT, horses are perfect because they won't step on magnetic mines, can see at night, and can carry soldiers across the Donbass faster than vehicles. But the real picture is that Russia started this war showing off new tanks, boasting about modernization, then those tanks were destroyed or abandoned in droves. Moscow then pulled out machinery designed when Stalin was still alive, and now, again, horses. The evolution of Russia's war machine has gone backwards a full century. Or maybe they're cosplaying to do a rerun of the Crimean War. So why is RT amplifying it? Well, because it fits a narrative. You see, Russia wants to spin necessity into heroism. Look at our resourcefulness, our romantic cavalry tradition, our defiance of Western technology. So, is the cavalry really coming back? Well, no, it's because it's not 1812. And this isn't a charge of the Cossacks. It's a charge of an army running out of options. Russia promised a future of warfare. Instead, it's galloping straight back into the past. Russians could live to be 100 or even 120 years old, said Russian Deputy Prime Minister Kolikova. She asserted that Russians age slowly, and in some regions, people allegedly already live to reach these fantastic numbers. She framed it as if longevity is part of Russia's destiny or national program or something. Now, if this were true, it would be a global medical sensation. There'd be Nobel Prizes, scientific journal articles, international headlines, and millions of people trying to move to Russia. But maybe there's a deeper context here.
Мы прекрасно понимаем, что потенциал у каждого человека разный. Кто-то стареет очень быстро, кто-то стареет медленно, и у тех, кто стареет медленно, есть достаточно большой потенциал уже сейчас жить и до 100, и до 120 лет. Это, кажется, фантастические цифры, но тем не менее они в некоторых регионах и нашей страны, и мира подвластны. Подвластны, и наша задача увеличить продолжительность и здоровой жизни.
Now, there is no credible demographic data backing the 100 to 120-year average lifespans anywhere in Russia, but I think you all know that. It's a narrative of superiority, exceptionalism, only in Russia can people live that long. It distracts from real problems, a population in decline and a public health crisis. It also functions as soft power messaging, project national confidence, advance an image of longevity, health, and vigor, all the while masking dysfunction. So in the end, the idea of Russians routinely living to 120 is just that, an idea. Fantasy dressed up in bureaucratic language. It's not science, not even vanity. It's just propaganda. And when a government starts making claims that defy biology, you know, what they're really pushing isn't truth. And with that, we conclude this edition of Break the Fake. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.